Hello students, today in the last part of French Revolution, we are going to learn about the abolition of slavery and revolution and everyday life. One of the most revolutionary forms of the Jacobin regime was the abolition of slavery in the French colonies. The colonies in the Caribbean were important suppliers of commodities such as tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee. But the reluctance of Europeans to go and work in distant and unfamiliar lands meant a shortage of labor on the plantations. So, this was met by a triangular slave trade between Europe, Africa, and the America. The slave trade began in the 17th century. French merchants sailed from the ports of Bordeaux or Nantes to the African coast where they bought slaves from local chieftains. Branded and shackled, the slaves were packed tightly into ships for the 3-month-long voyage across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. There they were sold to plantation owners. The exploitation of slave labor made it possible to meet the growing demand in European markets for sugar, coffee, and indigo. Port cities like Bordeaux and Nantes owed their economic prosperity to the flourishing slave trade. Throughout the 18th century, there was little criticism of slavery in France. The National Assembly held long debates about whether the rights of men should be extended to all French subjects, including those in the colonies. But it did not pass any laws, fearing opposition from businessmen whose incomes depended on the slave trade. It was finally the convention in 1794 legislated to freeze all slaves in French overseas possessions. This, however, turned out to be a short-term measure. 10 years later, Napoleon reintroduced slavery. Slavery was finally abolished in French colonies in 1848. Now we are going to see how life changed in France after 1789. One important law that came into effect soon after the storming of the Bastille in the summer of 1789 was the abolition of censorship. In the old regime, all written material and cultural activities like books, newspapers, plays could be published or performed only after they had been approved by the censors of the king. Now, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen proclaimed freedom of speech and expression to be a natural right. Freedom of the press also meant that opposing views of events could be expressed. Plays, songs, and festive processions attracted large numbers of people. This was one way they could grasp and identify with the ideas such as liberty or justice. An army chief under Louis XVI, namely Napoleon Bonaparte, crowned himself Emperor of France in 1804. As a modernizer, he set out to conquer neighboring European countries, disposing dynasties and creating kingdoms. He introduced many laws such as the protection of private property and a uniform system of weights and measures provided by the decimal system. Initially, many saw Napoleon as a liberator who would bring freedom for the people. But soon, the Napoleonic armies came to be viewed everywhere as an invading force. He was finally defeated at Waterloo in 1815. The ideas of liberty and democratic rights were the most important legacy of the French Revolution. These spread from France to the rest of Europe during the 19th century, where feudal systems were abolished. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, the father of Indian Renaissance, and Tipu Sultan, the king of Mysore, were Indian individuals who responded to the ideas coming from revolutionary France. These two Indian leaders were inspired by the ideals of nationalism and social equality of French Revolution. They were also influenced by democratic rights and the right and liberty of French Revolution. Thank you for watching.